die, taking it with us.
No. The goal here is to stay alive.
Yeah, okay.
Cody Kennedy and Tim Rutherford bring us The Last Video Store, a 2023 knowingly schlocky B-movie about video rentals. And it's possibly one of the most ambitious yet weirdest films I've seen of the year. Think The Last Action Hero, but for B-movies. So this is being put out by Arrow Video, and it focuses on a video store, presumably somewhere in Canada, because it's a Canadian movie. And it's one of these kind of last remaining bastions of the VHS era. And we've got this kind of kooky guy that sort of runs there as well as kind of lives there. And this young woman comes in wanting to return some videos from her father. And her father is this guy's best customer. And she also brings in this mysterious tape, which is kind of seemingly demonically possessed. And when they put this tape in the video player, the VCR, a load of kind of retro kind of movie characters will come out and cause havoc. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. Sound like fun? There have been a few movies that have been based on the kind of the concept of a last bastion VHS type store, and I've reviewed a couple of them on the channel. This one, as I say, is certainly the most ambitious and by far and away the most way out there. Let's talk about what works in this movie's favour. It has a fun kind of concept. Now, if you're familiar with The Last Action Hero, it's about this kid that travels into a kind of a movie and then gets the movie character to kind of come out into real life. And it's that second section which kind of happens here. And we have really three characters come out from, you know, kind of video movies from the kind of the 80s and 90s. Now, they're not licensed movies. They're kind of like archetypes, really. So we get a kind of a 90s science fiction monster which is made of CGI in the video, but when it comes into real life it still kind of looks like it's made of CGI, because obviously it is. Then we get a kind of Jason Voorhees style kind of slasher, and we also get a kind of Michael Dudikoff, David Bradley style sort of martial arts action star that all sort of come out and cause their own kind of style of havoc between this young woman and this kind of guy at this video store, and you know, obviously the cursed tape itself. So it's a really fun concept, I've got to say, and obviously this movie and the people behind it have a real reverence for the kind of the era of VHS, and this movie is really a love letter to that, with many kind of references and homages to you know, movies like kind of Evil Dead and the such that, you know, were kind of staples of that era. And when you watch the movie, you'll hear certain musical kind of like tinges and certain scenes that seem to kind of somewhat go in a way to kind of recreate classic imagery from kind of previous movies. So it's a lot of fun. And these three video movie characters that we have, again, they're kind of striking that sort of the cliches of the time and those type of characters. Especially funny is Viper, who is this kind of 80s, you know, straight to kind of DVD or VHS action hero, really kind of played up for kind of like comedic effect, which I thought was pretty good, to be honest. And they do something kind of quite interesting towards the end of the movie, which I'm not going to kind of say, but nonetheless, it's, you know, it's pretty out there, as I've said. So the movie obviously has these kind of different, it's looking at different sort of like archetypes from the VHS era, and although they're not kind of licensed, they're obviously kind of, you can kind of see where the influences are obviously from, but so I still think it can get away with it, and you know, you still be reverential despite them being not necessarily you know, actually Jason Voorhees and things like that. I think our video store clerk is kind of quite a fun sort of character, and he's kind of played for with like a kind of like a manic sort of energy, which is kind of quite fun. And you can kind of imagine he's somewhat typical of what you might imagine working in a video store, independent video store and stuff like that. So again, it was all sort of pretty fun, and this sort of dingy little one location set, which is this video shop. Again, it's sort of like, for someone like myself, and probably people who watch this review will quite appreciate the aesthetic, but maybe from the outside it kind of looks a little bit kind of like dingy and might be a bit sort of smelly and things like that. But you can kind of, you appreciate that aesthetic. For obviously a lower budget movie, I do think they do a good job here of having some kind of quite fun VFX. Now, some of them are meant to be kind of like, for example, our 90s science fiction monster, when he appears in like the real world, he obviously still looks like a kind of CGI creation. So it kind of, you can kind of be a little bit forgiving with that, but I think it works for this movie. I think there's some great kind of musical elements here that kind of, again, will evoke the kind of the 80s and the kind of the early 90s and that sort of style of, you know, that sort of music that used to get those straight to kind of VHS films. And as the film plot progresses, I think, you know, it ends in certainly a kind of a pretty fun way, I have to say, and does present a kind of like a larger threat. And this movie even has a little bit of like an emotional pathos as well, when there's a reveal later on in the movie. So that was all quite good. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to enjoy here, especially if you are a fan of the VHS era. What doesn't work, if I have to have one main complaint with this movie, I have to say it can be a little bit low energy at times. So it is just one location, and it primarily focuses on these two characters, and we get the introduction of these, you know, these video characters that sort of come out. But I did feel our main two protagonists, if you like, there's a little bit of like hanging around, and even when we're dealing with these VHS characters, it just feels a little less impactful than maybe you would hope. A little bit less, a bit low energy, as I say, and you just feel maybe there's a little bit of inexperience from our filmmakers in regards to kind of like sort of pacing and having an impactful scene and the kind of the level of directing here. There are some directorial flourishes that I do like in the movie, but I do think it's missing a little bit of impact at times. It just kind of feels like people kind of like hanging around and not really knowing what to do at times. As the film goes on, I think maybe it might get a little bit too weird and surreal for maybe some. Particularly kind of in the finale, it just kind of it kind of goes there, and it doesn't really give any explanation. The movie's not really concerned about having a really like clear narrative. It's meant to be more of a just almost like a kind of a fly through the stereotypes of the VHS era and kind of visiting them and having a little bit of time with them and sort of moving on to the next. It's not too concerned with having a complete narrative where we know what this cursed videotape is all about and things like that. It just kind of is there, and you just kind of got to accept it. So don't be expecting too much of an origin story necessarily. Now it does all take place in this one location, which is in this kind of video shop, which is all a little bit sort of on the darker side. So the movie has a sort of a low light effect throughout the movie, which at times does make it feel a little bit sort of dim and dingy. Now that, I think, is probably part of the aesthetic, but maybe it wouldn't have hurt to have a couple of scenes with a little bit more of an interesting kind of background here and there. Maybe, I don't know, but I guess I can see what they were trying to go for, but at the time I think, yeah, just if you look at it, it's very much the same kind of colour palette all the way through the movie, so it's not exactly visually stimulating some of the time. I mean, when we have our fun characters do stuff, great. But again, there are times here where I just thought maybe it looks a little kind of dull on screen at times. But overall, it's a fun movie. It's not exactly a quick paced sort of action thriller or anything like that, but it's certainly a very reverential movie to a bygone era, really sort of, you know, showing a loving affection for those sort of style of movies. And I think it's a very fun movie because of that, despite maybe it's kind of a little lacking in pace at times. It has some fun sort of characters. They're not massively fleshed out, if we're honest, but nonetheless I do think they're still kind of quite fun and kooky. And certainly if you are a fan of the VHS era, but you also like a little bit of the surreal, then this movie may well be up your street. I'll give it a 6 out of 10. It's a fun movie, certainly for a specific crowd. I don't know if it's got huge amounts of appeal outside of that, but certainly if you are a VHS fan like I was back in the day, then I would suggest checking this one out. It's probably the best out of these video shop movies that I've seen and reviewed so far. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.